As a responsible person with growing concerns for your privacy and personal liberty, you want to know where we're headed and what you can do about it. We ask the experts what you need to do to take prudent and responsible action to safeguard your family's wealth and well-being, and what basic first steps will help you to be aware and prepared. ReluctantPreppers.com.
Welcome back, Reluctant Preppers. We have a returning guest tonight. Brad Harris, founder of FullSpectrumSurvival.com, is here with us again on Reluctant Preppers. Brad is a news feed analyst. He watches the emergency events and critical happenings around the world 7x24 through some special programming and technology that he's developed. He also is a hands-on instructor, trainer, and expert in many skills related to self-reliance, survival, outdoor, and in emergency situations. Brad, thanks for joining us again here on Reluctant Preppers.
Thank you so much, Dunnigan, for having me back, and thank you to everyone for listening.
The topic we'd like to address with your help tonight is the things that you will have to do in a disaster. People often ask us about some of the preparedness that might seem a little more glamorous, like people talk about gold and silver, and people like to put it beside some emergency food and that sort of thing. But as we were talking before the recording, you were mentioning that there are some absolutely essential tasks that may not at all be glamorous and may not be at top of mind of anyone's list, but that proper and prudent preparedness will tell us you really have to take these into account and have a plan around these things and get yourself set mentally that this is going to have to be part of your survival plan in emergency. So could you address some of those topics of things that you will have to do in a disaster with us tonight?
Absolutely. So, like you had mentioned at the beginning, I am scouring the internet. The program that I wrote is looking for keywords and events happening all across the world in multiple different languages. And it's looking for things like disease and virus, war, outbreak, radiation, disaster, extreme weather events, police brutality, martial law. It's really going over the entire spectrum of things that matter to you and I and to the listeners, things that matter for our own personal preparedness and how to better prepare for those events if they happen here to us. And one thing that it has shown me is that a crisis event happens to someone around the world every single day, and often to large groups. And you have the ongoing disasters like the Syrian civil war, you have the Yemeni civil war, you have the Venezuelan economic crisis, and you have these things that are happening every day, and it forces people to fall back to skill sets that have been sort of bred out of the first world, especially the Western world. And I wanted to talk to everybody about the things that you're going to have to do when a crisis strikes. And one of those things is, of course, water. As you know, Dunnigan, water is a massive priority on everyone's emergency preparedness needs. You only have 3 days, and in all likelihood, 2 days without water before someone succumbs to dehydration. This means that every single person that finds themselves in a crisis event is going to have to boil or treat water in absolutely massive amounts. Imagine a family of 4. They have to boil, just for their drinking needs and no others, they have to boil 4 gallons of water per day. I don't know if anyone has ever boiled 4 gallons of water, but it takes a massive amount of fuel. So that goes into the next step. Now, who's going to be gathering the fuel? Who's going to be giving up the smoke signature of this ongoing task? And what can be done to sort of mitigate the time that is spent doing this? And one of those things that I wanted to talk about was the creation of a slow sand filter. Recent statistics have shown that up to 800,000 people per year around our Earth, and with some upward of 1.5 million, die from gastrointestinal disease that is associated with the ingestion of unclean water. This means that water is a huge priority. What people can do about it to avoid boiling massive amounts of water per day or sanitizing massive amounts with bleach is to create a slow sand filter. Do you know what a slow sand filter is?
I have a vague idea from the Boy Scout handbook decades and decades ago.
Okay, well, how it works, and it's important to understand the difference between a slow sand filter and a rapid sand filter. A rapid sand filter is the movement of water through multiple layers of sand and charcoal and pebbles. With a slow sand filter, And a biologically active layer of sediment called a schmutzdeck or a dirt cover is formed at the top, and it looks like algae. And this formation, this dirt cover, creates a biologically active layer over the filter where organic material and inorganic material is trapped and biologically degraded. So what people can do is build these types of filters in a 5-gallon bucket or in a 30-gallon brute trash can, which the brute gray trash cans are food grade. They're used in restaurants around the United States. And they can then sanitize, purify multiple gallons per day and not have to lay waste to the time that it takes or the signature that it gives away when you're purifying water. But that's just really one of those things. There's so many less than glamorous survival skills that need to be talked about. You have things like making charcoal, which I mentioned very briefly. Everybody needs to practice strict light and noise discipline. Where I'm at now, at the homestead I'm on, one of my friends here, as different small weather events have taken place, he lives 100% off solar. So as these events take place and the rest of the countryside is without power, he's made the mistake one year of keeping the lights on. And what that does is tell everybody else that this person still has power. How do they have power? And they want to inquire about it. Even during a 4-hour power outage, they want to come and inquire about it. And, it almost awakens within the person this, you have something that I want that I can't get feeling.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what you'll find during a medium duration emergency if someone sees your lights on while they're struggling just to survive.
We had a recent guest on, Galen Lehman, who is the CEO of Lehman's Hardware in Kidron, Ohio, talking about the importance both practically and psychologically of maintaining the ability to enjoy and have a source of light in the case of an emergency. And it sounds like you're talking about not just a temporary emergency situation, but if there was some kind of a real regional or extended emergency where people became desperate, and some of the people actually have written in comments under that interview talking about the need for guarding the visibility, the obviousness of your power or light or heat, whatever source it is. So what are some strategies around that?
Well, one of the things I want to say is during Hurricane Katrina and Hurricane Sandy up on the East Coast, people were coming and stealing other people's generators. And what they would do is, and I'm sure you've heard these stories before or similar ones, they would bring a lawnmower up to the generator, crank it on, and then take the generator away. And from inside the house, the person didn't know the difference. They heard the generator going, and this would, of course, be at a time where it was nighttime and no lights were on. So you do have to be constantly aware that during anything longer than a 48 or 72-hour emergency, people start to change in their selfishness of needs. And even if they don't get to the point where they need the water to survive or they need the food to survive, it unlocks a certain lawlessness within a lot of people. And those are the type of people that you need to keep an eye on. One of the ways to do that, and another less than glamorous skill set, is monitoring available information for updates on the crisis. So that's going to have to be somebody's job in a medium duration emergency. They're going to have to monitor the radios. If the TV is still working, monitor the TV, see what's going on, and be able to understand the entire situation and make good judgments within the group.
Could we hold you up there for a minute? Because I've heard you on different podcasts of yours where you're interviewing people who are specialists in communication specifically, and you've talked about the need to get different perspectives, because if you only go for the one main news channel on your radio or whatever, you're going to get the official story. But what are some quick strategies to open people's thought process to how they can get alternate perspectives on what's going on, get a more complete picture?
If you're talking in our current time of relative peace in the world, definitely reach outside of your local news. Once you've reached outside of that, reach outside of your state news and start to look at how the other countries of the world are viewing things that are going on within your country. You'd be surprised to see that many of the citizens in China, many of the citizens in Cuba don't have a keen understanding of how the Western world views what's going on to them. They don't have a keen understanding of things like the police brutality and what that really means and why it's not acceptable here, but it's more than commonplace in their country. So being able to reach outside of your area and start to get that information will allow you to become a more informed person and make better decisions. But if you're talking about an emergency locally, then you want to start to listen in on different things. You want to start to listen in on police bands using a police scanner. And while an app on your phone will work right now, it won't work in the event of a medium or long duration emergency. So having something handheld is imperative. Shortwave radio is another one. If you have a shortwave radio, you're still going to be able to hear news from other countries, even if your news is locked down or if you don't have access to things like your television. And then ham radio, of course, is the next step up. But you really need to consider all of these in a bucket of information and have them readily available should something happen so that you can start to build a better picture of what's going on and make more informed decisions for you and your family.
All right. Well, I interrupted you, and you were going down a list, and you had hit looking for monitoring available information for updates on the crisis, and that's where I wanted to make sure you hit on those points. So go ahead with your other non-glamorous tasks that you have to do after an emergency.
One of the biggest ones, and I've talked about this on Full Spectrum Survival on YouTube, is to consider the benefits and the dangers of bringing other people into your group. And consider even family members and lifelong friends. Are they going to be a burden during a disaster, or will they be an asset? You, of course, want the people who are going to be assets, and those are people with skill sets like first aid or hunters. Really, any type of medical professional is an asset. People who have enjoyed camping all their life, other preparedness-minded individuals, things like metal workers, cooks and herbalists. Anyone who can work in the garden is a huge asset because food production is a priority. Former military and security enforcement members, anyone with a skill set that you can look at and say, okay, that would be really good to have during a disaster. On the other side, you have to consider burdens. And I know in my own family, I don't know about yours, Don, again, but in my own family, I have burdens. I have people who don't think anything will ever happen, but know that I am prepared to be self-sufficient and more independent than they are. And they have openly said things like, well, I know where to go if a disaster strikes.
Right.
Have you experienced the same thing?
We've been a little bit more closed-lipped about our preparedness aspects, and we have even had a hard time engaging family members to be interested in having discussions about it. So far we haven't gotten that far.
That might be a benefit. Yeah, that might be a good thing in your case. But knowing, people will know that you're prepared one way or the other. And if they're unwilling to accept reality now before it strikes, in all likelihood, if they don't have that skill set, then they're going to become a burden. Anyone, of course, with alcohol or drug dependencies will be a burden. They'll be leeching off of your skills and your needs to really suffer, and it's hard to say it, but to suffer through their dependency in the event of a crisis. Pain and depression medicine, as well as I do, that SSRIs and things of that nature really throw people for a loop if they're suddenly unable to continue that medication.
Yeah.
And I guess it really boils down to a person is an asset for your family or for your group if they are willing to work in return for food and security. And that work includes a lot of things, cleaning the bathroom system. Not many people have gone 2 weeks without a working toilet. So that, of course, is a daily maintenance unless you build and use a composting toilet. cooking, cleaning, foraging, gardening, hunting, firearms training. All of these things are jobs that people will have to stick to. And we see people sticking to them in places like Syria, where, now a geopolitical conflict has driven the citizens of Syria, who were just in a booming, medically advanced country and a tourist attraction country years before, just a couple of years ago. And it's now an area that is ravaged by bullet holes and missile holes and constant jets flying overhead, dropping chlorine bombs, and really a disastrous situation. And we see from some of the information we pick up on our algorithm, people communicating their roles and their things like how hard just cooking is and how hard, keeping clean is and things like that. And so it's those types of less than glamorous skills that everyone will have to sort of fall into during a long duration emergency.
You mentioned in a previous podcast with us about who do you trust. You're talking about skills here, but it is more than just the technology or the technique or the knowledge and the know-how. There's also the trustworthiness of the individual, because if you're talking about firearms, you're basically putting your life in these people's hands. You're putting your life and your livelihood, any supplies and any cash of anything that you have is in the hands of those who you trust to keep watch, for example, when you finally sleep. That's
right. Oh yeah, and that's another thing, is being prepared to lose a lot of sleep. People don't often look at how much sleep you're going to lose when you're concerned during a disaster that everyone around you is becoming a target. And so now you're going to have to do things like keep a watch and set a watch. But you're absolutely right about who do you trust. And it is best for every person listening to make that sort of consideration now. We have seen people who have brought together preparedness-minded groups, and these people have even went as far as financially obligating themselves into a retreat location where now they're sort of bound to the other members of this group. And then they come to find out that Joe Schmo or, Amy is not a good person. And what do you do about that kind of thing? It's, of course, better for you to start considering that now. And would you give Joe Schmo a firearm and let them protect you and your family? Or would you question that? And if you question it, it's better to question it now than later.
So you mentioned, can you get back for a moment about practicing strict light and noise discipline? You mentioned that. What does that mean, especially when you have mixed ages? I can understand more if you have sort of sturdy, confident adults that can understand that it's going to be, when the sun goes down, it's going to be dark time. We can, how you manage that. If you're in your own home, do you put up some kind of, light-proof shades or something so that you can have some light inside for reading or something after? But then especially with children or younger people, how in the world can you manage that idea of light discipline?
Well, things like blackout curtains have become very affordable. We have chosen blackout curtains, and they have an appeal to them. They make blackout curtains now that have a completely blacked out window side and then a decorative indoor side. So, the wives and everyone don't have to just be stuck looking at a black, ugly curtain. Mm-hmm. So that is a good option, but that's a proactive option. People should do that now. If you're caught in a disaster, and I'll give you a good example. In Venezuela, we have seen multiple reports of people who have even just by eating at candlelight and kept their windows open, been broken into and their food stolen. Could you imagine just sitting down to dinner with your wife or your children? You light the candle, it got late, you meant to eat earlier, but now you've lit the candle, you sit down to eat, and suddenly your windows are broken or your door is broken, and now your food is stolen, and that's really a best case scenario, that they just steal your food and leave.
Right.
So you had asked about how do you sort of facilitate that. I would say number one is acclimate the family now to blackout curtains. You're going to get a better night's sleep just to start with. You're going to reduce your air conditioning and heating costs. It's just a better option to start right now. Plus, you won't be forced to put up a rudimentary or an impromptu barrier in the event of a crisis. Noise control is a little bit harder. If you live in an environment where where your home is very thin walled, you have to consider that when talking noise control. But it's really just the thought process of your children, your wife, you just keeping things at a lower tone. But it even goes further beyond that, and you're not going to practice firearms training all the time. Or you might move away from your location to practice firearm training if you're looking at a long duration emergency. And so in Syria, right now, there was a lot of people when the Civil War began that didn't understand firearms. And they had to make that choice of, do I become somewhat proficient with a firearm, or do I continue in this bubble that, if something happens, I'm just going to be a victim? So the ones that have decided to become somewhat proficient with a firearm had to reach out and hopefully have a family member or a friend that would help them learn that skill set. And the smart ones would move further away from their location and do the firearms training, because that tells everybody someone there has a gun.
When you mentioned the theft of auxiliary power generators, it made me think about silent power generation, such as solar with battery storage, that kind of thing. Is there other tips around silent or zero or almost zero footprint sources of either electricity or heat?
I would say solar is definitely the number one. You can, with the efficiency of solar panels now, you can get panels with just a couple hundred watts will provide you with lights and a fan. Make sure that you do your research, get a inverter, preferably a pure sine wave inverter. Those are capable at the right wattage of even powering small window shakers, which of course breaks the noise discipline rule. But you can also power things like a small chest freezer. Make sure that you have a good battery backup, and you're going to want to look for amp hours and see exactly how many amp hours you need. And of course, when we're discussing this with people and they say, okay, how do I go solar? The easiest way is to look at your power bill and see what your kilowatt usage is. But that sort of has its own caveat, because if you want to go solar, you want to become more efficient as a person. So you don't want to use as many kilowatts as you're using right now, and you want to scale everything back. Replace all your lights with LED lights. Get used to a lower wattage. You can get a small wattage LED, and your eyes adjust to it. It doesn't have to be, a surgery room bright in the bedroom that you're at.
Right. There's certain activities, if you're doing financial bookwork, or if you have a student that's reading or something, then you need the brightness just in that very limited location. But you're right, for general living spaces, you really do not need a lot of brightness. Yep. That's
right. So I would say everybody should consider solar now, and even if you just go for a small package that includes just one or two 100-watt or even better 250-watt panels, a small inverter, and a small charge controller and battery, you could get away with a decent package for less than $500. And you would have the peace of mind that, A, right now you can take some of your items off the grid, and B, during a disaster, you can rely on having your fans on and your lights on in the house.
You mentioned a couple of times in passing making charcoal. That's in order to reduce your smoke signature in the case of actually needing a fire for heating or for boiling?
Yeah, that's exactly right. So a person's going to make charcoal the same way that they would make charred cloth. And for anyone who might not know, I'm sure a lot of the listeners do, charred cloth is a tinder. It's an ignition source. an ignition material that you will use in fire starting. So charred cloth, rather than a punky wood or even a dusted wood, will take a spark from a ferrocium rod, or it'll take a spark from an empty lighter, and you'll be able to turn that into a flame by following the steps of making a tinder bundle and fire making. And you make charred cloth by taking any natural or cotton material. You can use natural materials in the forms of small seed pods, fluffy seed pods, things like that you'll find just around in nature. And you can use cotton. You can use socks, blue jeans, T-shirts, really anything. And you're going to put it in a container. You kind of see this ideal where everybody puts it in an Altoid tin and they take a nail and they poke a hole in the top. You can really use any container. If you're cooking food, use your tin can. and put your cotton in there. Just cut it into small squares about 2 inches by 2 inches. Put them into there. Lid it somehow, whether it's with tin foil or really anything else, and poke a small hole for the smoke to escape. You're going to set this on an active fire, and what it's going to do is it's going to incinerate. It's going to char the material inside, but not burn it up as if it were in a fire. And what it's going to leave you with is a very black and dusted material that will then take a spark. You're going to want to do charred coal in the same way. You're going to start a fire. You're going to start your wood on fire, and then you're going to rob it of oxygen. And it's going to smolder, and it's going to burn itself through, but it's going to leave that charred coal. It's going to leave the charred wood there that you can then use for a smokeless fire. The Viet Cong during Vietnam, they eluded military forces by using charcoal. And they would be able to still purify their water, cook their food, move through the bush, and not have an open fire, which, of course, you and I know gives away that heat and smoke signature and is really intuitive for us as humans to smell, see, and feel the heat from a fire.
Just for clarification, when you're in the process of making the charcoal, does that process create smoke? So you have to find a safe time and place to do that?
It does. You're absolutely right. And for me, I have a 5-gallon bucket of just charcoal, the same stuff you can go buy at the store, and just put it in a 5-gallon bucket, put the lid on it, and you're going to have that for good. And what I'm going to do is if I go out in the woods for a couple of days, I take a brick of charcoal, just a briquette with. And when I'm done with the fire, when I'm done kneading it, then I just cover it with sand to rob it of oxygen and put that fire out, and then I continue to carry it along with me.
And now that's another topic you mentioned in our preparation discussion, was the ability to carry fire with you. Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Yeah, that becomes important because every fire, and the saying here, that you only have to have a fire when you need it the most, and it's most difficult to make when you need it the most. So when you're cold, when your hands are shaky because you're near hypothermic, when it's wet and everything around you is wet, those are the times that you need the fire the most, and they're also the hardest times to make it. So once you have a fire going, you're going to want to carry it from one position to another. One way is, of course, with that charcoal that you have already made or brought with you. If you start an ember on the corner of a piece of charred wood or a corner of a briquette of charcoal, you're going to be able to carry that for hours in a tin can and carry it to your next location, and then build a tinder bundle and grow it into a flame at that location.
How do you prevent the charcoal in your tin can from burning up everything in your backpack?
Try to limit its oxygen as much as possible and carry it outside of your pack. So you're going to, you're going to get a little bit. And now, if you use a briquette, you're not going to get any smoke signature. If you're doing charred wood, you might get a little bit of smoke signature as you rob it of even more oxygen. But just cover it as much as you can. If you can't, it's okay. It's still going to get you a good long way.
Any other non-glamorous skills that people should practice, or at least prepare themselves mentally and from a practical standpoint to be able to carry out in the case of an emergency?
One of the biggest conflicts that we see in people is something that it's not fun to talk about, but it's going to the bathroom. If a person has to be mobile and they're either constipated or they have diarrhea from a waterborne disease, that reduces their mobility on a large scale. A lot of people in our first world don't have the wherewithal or just the readiness to go to the bathroom anywhere. So they have a hard time going to the bathroom in the woods. They have an even harder time coming anywhere near their excrement. So I think one of the least glamorous things for everyone to consider is, without toilet paper and without access to wild greens that are safe to rub on you, how are you going to go to the bathroom and continue to be sanitary?
Yeah.
So one of those things is to prepare yourself and to prepare everybody in your family or your group to use a reusable cotton rag. and then consider how you're going to sanitize that after and wash it in a safe location and then reuse it again. Toilet paper is even in an economic collapse, that's one of the first things to go.
There was a video, maybe it wasn't on your channel, but it was maybe related, where it was a husband-wife team talking about how to use smooth rocks for for that purpose.
For wiping up after. Yeah, really anything that you can, get your hands on that is safe to rub against your skin is something that you should prepare to do. But definitely consider those things. Consider who's going to change the waste bucket. One of the other big things that I wanted to talk to you about, and you tell me if we have the time for it. If not, we'll take it for another discussion. But as we watch the avian influenza virus really rampage through Asia right now, and by rampage, I mean that last year there were 19 confirmed human cases of the avian influenza virus, and this year there are over 400, the most in history. And virologists around the world, disease researchers, and governments are all just waiting for a large outbreak. What they've seen is small pockets, small groups of outbreaks, and they're waiting for that large outbreak to signal that it has made that large jump, across the species barrier from animals to humans, and can now live within humans, passing it on from one to the other. One of those things that people don't want to consider is the ability to quarantine and contain friends and family, or even quarantine themselves from other potential carriers of a biological threat. That's something that you really have to take into consideration. Are you ready to prepare a washdown and decontamination zone? Do you know the bleach solution so that you aren't just putting too much bleach in it or not putting enough to start to wash people down, or materials down like your shoes and other things that you can carry a virus from outside to inside. And if you do have animal husbandry, if you do have livestock, are you prepared to quarantine and watch them for illness and contain that illness if an outbreak does begin?
We visited a historic fort in Ontario, Canada, several years ago when there was a big concern about mad cow disease and so on, and hoof and mouth disease, and They had us walk through basically a AstroTurf doormat in a tray with bleach water to rub our shoes on that before we were allowed to enter from the outside world into their environment, where they had all these various beasts of burden and so on. And then again when we were leaving, as one precaution that they were taking, just to make sure that they were trying to reduce the chance of transmission of hoof and mouth disease from the outside world into their area. But are there other considerations around are simple preparations that people need to make about containment of disease, in terms of supplies that they should have on hand, masks or gloves or the sanitizer or things like that?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So definitely N95 masks have been proven to reduce the biological threat of any influenza contagion down to numbers that are safe, considered safe. So N95s are very inexpensive. People can buy 20, 30, 100 of them really without putting out too much pocket change. If you're going to start wearing N95 masks, you have to be prepared to shave your beard, keep your stubble down, make sure that the women don't have long hair that interrupts the barrier between the mask and the skin on your face. Look at things like rain jackets, rain suits, or fishing suits. Anything that will give you a barrier that you can wash down easily, especially if you're going into an area that has a high risk of contamination. And I'll give you an easy example here. Right now, as the virus mutated, and they just confirmed in Asia that it has mutated this year, it's infecting backyard poultry at a higher number than it ever has before. And they have some consideration that that's what's driving the species jump from poultry to humans. So as people continue to care for their livestock, they should be prepared to wear an outfit, a suit that isn't over the top. It's not an entire biological suit, but it does provide them with another barrier from catching that disease. One of those is definitely a rain poncho with leggings and boots, and that way, when they get back inside, they can shed it shed it in an area on the porch or an area before you actually enter your house.
I just had a question for you, because I had read several years ago about these annual flu strains that they try to anticipate and create the right vaccine for and all that sort of thing. And goodness knows there's enough controversy about vaccines themselves and whether they're more harm than good. But that's not what my question is about. The article was saying that there's this one province or one county within that province or something in China specifically where it seems each year these new strains make the jump from the animal to human barrier. And I'm just wondering, is that square with your more recent research? And what is it about that? Is it something about the different living conditions there, or is it just it's got to start somewhere and it just tends to they're just ahead? And there's the waves come from that because just they're ahead of us in just the way that propagates? Or do you know anything about the sort of recurring root cause of that?
Yeah, it absolutely does have to do with population density and living conditions. So virologists around the world consider either Asia, specifically China, or India to be the grounds of the next global pandemic. Whenever it happens, and we all know it will happen, it's just a matter of when, not if. When it happens, it will come from either Asia or India. And that is to say, of course, if it's not biologically created in one form or another. I'm sure you remember recently Bill Gates just did a big announcement saying that 30% of the world is at risk because of huge advancements to biological and gene editing. And that really backyard scientists can now go take an influenza virus and mix it with something else and then accidentally even release it into the earth. So if it is natural, it will come from Asia or India. It's definitely something that we keep on our priority list to watch for. And it's visible right now in the spread that it almost 90% of the species jumps from poultry to humans is happening in Asia. But you'll see that here in the U.S., we are not immune to that. Just a couple of months ago, we had this same virus, I believe it was H7N9. It might have been another one of the strands. It jumped from poultry, wild birds, to wild cats in New York, and then from wild cats to the veterinarian that was treating them. And so you see these multiple species jumps, and that's really unheard of in the virological world without advancements in mutation that allow the virus to adapt to new hosts and to start spreading a new host. So they are saying if it's not this year, it's going to be very soon that we see the potential for a global pandemic.
Any other non-glamorous tasks that people need to be prepared for in the event of a disaster?
I would say that the last thing to be prepared for is just to do the things that you don't want to do. Like you had mentioned at the beginning of the show, the genre sort of glamorizes, all the best gear, all the coolest gear, all the neatest techniques and things that look great and make things easier. But it really comes down to the fact that we're strong as humans and we can survive. And so we just have to be prepared to do those things. We have to be prepared to eat the grubs, forage for our edibles, boil literally the junk out of roadkill and of other deceased animals to make that safe to eat, and do all these things that right now that's not a part of our daily life, to better our outcome in the event of a medium to long duration emergency.
I have to confess it's an anecdote that tells me that I'm changing, because years ago I would watch on television, these Army Ranger training or whatever, and they were cooking mealworms and earthworms in their scrambled eggs, and I was just thought, that is not possible. That is just I can't believe. And I got to tell you, I went out yesterday morning. It had been raining a lot the day before. Earthworms were all over the driveway, and the sun had come out and baked them dry. And I'm walking my dogs past there. I'm looking down, I'm thinking, that looks a lot like jerky.
Well, and that you're right. And it really is, around the rest of the world, people are used to eating bugs. But here we're not, even though the FDA allows a certain amount of bug material and rat droppings and cockroach droppings into your average food, food source. We're not used to it. We're not used to seeing that bug and picking it up and putting it in our mouth. But they are healthy and they are eaten around the world. And if anyone wants to try, we grow mealworms for our chickens. Mealworms are one of the easiest things to grow as a good protein for your chickens. All you need is a couple of things. You need the mealworms, which then turn into beetles that lay the eggs. You need oats for them to live in. And you need a half of a potato cut and put with the wet side up. And the beetles come over, they drink the moisture from the potato.
Yeah.
Yep, exactly. They eat the oats and they lay their eggs. And one female beetle lays 800 eggs per day. And so you just have a massive growth in your mealworm chamber. And you can do this in a large bin. And we have eaten those mealworms because we know everything about them. We know what they're eating. We know they're, and we have no problem eating them. And they just taste like a crunchy oat because that's really all they're eating.
In this case, if you get past the thought process of it and you just take a just objective look at this, they can't be dirty. They're in this clean bucket. They're eating your clean oats you gave them. They're eating the clean potato you gave them. There's no way they can be bad.
That's right. Exactly. So that's a good way for people to kind of get over it themselves. Plus, if they do have backyard poultry or anything like that, it's a great way to kind of get off the grid, so as to say, so that they're not buying egg layer or chicken scratch to feed to their chickens.
Right. And the other joke I just had to share, and this is so true from the experience from the Boundary Waters Canoe Area Wilderness in northern Minnesota. The old joke is you mix either a Kool-Aid or Tang sometimes for your drink, and the title, the nickname of it is bug juice. And the old story is that on the first day when the mosquito falls into your bug juice, you say, "Oh, gross!" And you throw the cup, you pour it out in the bushes immediately because you just can't stand the thought of it. The second day, the mosquito lands in your bug juice, you go, "Oh, gross!" You reach in with your fingers, pick out the mosquito, throw the mosquito away, drink the juice. The third day, the mosquito falls in your juice, you go, shrug your shoulders, toss it down.
That's right, and that is, that's a good adage because people will adapt and they will change. I guess that's my biggest takeaway from all that I do, from all that I research, all of the information in the wilderness survival and primitive survival courses that I give. The biggest takeaway is you are strong and you will survive. All you have to do is break out of the box of fatalism. And once you're out of that, you will do the things necessary to survive and to keep your family safe.
Well, Brad, thanks for this journey through the things that nobody wants to really think about, nobody wants to do. We all want to get the 100-round magazines and the stacks of gold and silver, but to talk about, emptying the latrine and that sort of thing is something that people need to have a plan around. And it does show us probably glaring weak spots in our preparedness repertoire. So just thank you so much always for joining us and sharing your breadth of wisdom. It is a full spectrum, as your title of Full Spectrum Survival mentioned. So what else can people find on your channel as a parting gift to them here? So what kinds of information do you provide on Full Spectrum Survival?
Monday through Friday, if they just go to YouTube, type in Full Spectrum Survival, they'll see us there. They can subscribe to the channel. Monday through Friday, they're going to get global news alerts with the World News Update, which is what our program feeds us and we feed back to the community as far as alerts on the things that you need to know on a daily basis. Then once or twice a week, we do crisis tips and crisis updates, which is more wilderness and primitive survival guided, really giving you the things like making a tinder bundle, how long to boil water, doing some of those less than glamorous things, but wild edibles and things like that. And then we also just restarted something we had done in the past, and that's creating fictional micro movies. We had just put the micro movie out, I think it was 2 or 3 days ago, to a very welcome success within the community. And what we're doing is taking a fictional setting and not always taking the best thing to do and teaching through that entertaining aid of getting people thinking, okay, well, I wouldn't want to do that, or why'd you do that? And I've had so many people ask me things like, why did you put cranberries or raisins in your cup? Or, why did you take your firearm off and, put it in your sleeping bag? Why did you do those things? So it shows me that through the entertaining side, people are really looking at it and considering why I did something and whether they should do something similar.
Excellent. Oh, I'd like to talk to you more about that, and we'll include the link to one that you sent us in the description here, so our viewers can take that in and get caught up on that. So just once again, Brad, thank you so much always for joining us here in Reluctant Preppers.
Thank you, and thank you everyone for listening. Hope you all have a great day. Stay safe and keep watch.